Hi, I'm Joe Miller, anatomy teacher for YogaRenew, and welcome to Understanding Yoga Poses for Beginners. In this series of classes, we'll look at three poses: downward facing dog, revolved triangle, and eagle pose. These are all kind of fairly complex poses. There's a lot going on in them. So what I thought would be helpful to do is to kind of break them down, look at some of the components of them, put it all together so you really understand better how these poses work and how they can work in your own body. So for this class, we're going to be looking at downward facing dog. You'll want to have a blanket. I'm sitting on mine. And you'll want to have a couple of yoga blocks close by. So we're going to start off lying down on your back. For me, when I lie down on the back, I like to have some support behind my head. So you may find that you need that or not. Just adjust the microphone here. But the idea is that you want to be able to feel like your head is comfortable when you're lying down on your back. You don't want your chin tucked in towards your chest, but you also don't want it falling backward. And then you can bend your knees and just place your feet on the floor and bring your arms down alongside you and just take a few moments to first of all, just allow yourself to settle into the support of the floor and to feel how your body meets the floor. So here, the floor provides a little bit of feedback. Right? It'll give your brain some information about the shape of your body, and in particular, the shape of your spine, because you can feel that some parts of your spine are in contact with the floor. But you can also probably feel that there's some parts of your spine that are not in contact with the floor. So see if you can just pay attention to that sensation. So we can start down at the bottom of your spine. That's your tailbone. And then just above your tailbone is your sacrum, which is the back of your pelvis. And I'm going to guess that probably pretty much for everybody, the back of your pelvis feels like it's pretty solidly on the floor. That there's some point where you feel your sacrum really sort of solidly resting on the floor. And then the spine of the lower back, that part of the spine actually curves forward. So you might feel that there might be a little bit of space behind your lower back. Even if there's not, I would say you're almost certainly going to feel there's less weight there than there is on your pelvis. So just notice that. And then if you continue to let your attention move upward, you'll feel the spine of your upper back, your rib cage. And you'll feel that there's some part of your spine there that, again, really rests very solidly on the floor. And that's because that part of your spine curves backward. So let's see if you can feel that. You might also notice the feeling of your rib cage resting on the floor. And then also your two shoulder blades. Your shoulder blades are kind of triangular shaped bones that rest against the back of the rib cage. They're the wide part of the triangle is at the top, the point is at the bottom. See if you can feel how much of your shoulder blades do you feel in contact with the floor? Is it just the little pointy bottom tip? Do you feel the upper part of the shoulder blade in contact with the floor? Whatever you notice. And also just notice, more than likely, you feel something different in your right shoulder than in your left shoulder. So just take a note of that. And then the spine of your neck, right? You can notice, of course, that part curves forward, so you've got some space behind your neck, and then you've got the back of your head resting on the floor. All right, so we're just going to start with a few very, very simple movements of the pelvis. This will be a little bit of a tilting of the pelvis forward, and what I mean by that is that you'll tilt your pelvis so your tailbone will press more into the floor and your lower back will arch. And then we'll do the opposite. So we'll kind of tilt the pelvis backward. That means the top of the sacrum moves closer to the floor, the lower back flattens, and the tailbone will lift a little away from the floor. And just go back and forth between these two movements. So you're tilting your pelvis forward and backward. You don't have to lift your pelvis. It'll stay on the ground. And it really does not need to be a big movement at all. And in fact, especially if you feel any kind of irritation in your back, please don't make it a big movement. You can really learn everything you need to know about this movement in, I don't know, probably the first millimeter or so. So it doesn't need to be a big movement. Certainly we don't want to do such a big movement that it's feeling like it's crunching your back at all. But see if you could feel how, as you move your pelvis in this way, that your spine responds. Right? You feel your lower back arches more when you tilt your pelvis forward, and it flattens a little bit when you tilt your pelvis backward. And then one more little bit of anatomy. The front of your pelvis is your pubic bone. So see if you could feel that when you tilt your pelvis forward, your pubic bone is moving downward. It's moving kind of downward between the thighs. And when you tilt your pelvis backward, your pubic bone, the front of the pelvis, is moving upward. Right, so a couple more times like that. Just see if you can feel these movements, because we're going to come back to this a little bit later. This will be important in understanding kind of what your pelvis is doing in downward facing dog. All right, and then just let's let that go. And now bring both arms up toward the ceiling, like you're kind of like Frankenstein, with your arms sort of out in front of you. But of course, because you're on your back, they're pointed up toward the ceiling. And then keep your elbows straight, but see if you can lift your hands toward the ceiling and then lower them down. And just feel that the way you do that is by lifting your shoulder blades away from the floor and then bringing them back towards the floor. So do this a couple of times. Again, it doesn't have to be a big movement. But see if you could feel that as you lift your shoulder blades away from the floor, they spread apart from each other. As you move your shoulder blades toward the floor, they move closer to each other. You can do that a couple of times. Just feeling how the shoulder blades can move on the back. All right, good. And then bring your hands down. Just take a few moments to, again, feel that contact of the shoulder blades with the floor. And now, this time, bring your arms not toward the ceiling, but alongside your ears. So your arms are overhead in relationship to you. Right? Arms alongside your ears. And then just notice as you did this pop your lower back up away from the floor? Right? Probably it did. That's okay. Or just notice that. See if maybe you can reach up a little bit more through your right fingers so you get a little more stretch through the right side, and then reach a little more through the left fingers. And just back and forth a couple of times. Like you kind of elongate one side and then the other. All right, and then just let both arms be long. Feel how the backs of the shoulder blades are kind of making contact with the floor. And more than likely, you're going to feel that the tops of the shoulder blades have moved toward the floor. And then as you bring your arms back down alongside you, you might notice the tops of the shoulder blades lift a little away from the floor. Let's do that a couple of times. Let's bring the arms overhead. Feel how the tops of the shoulder blades go backward. That helps you to bring the arms overhead. And then when you bring the arms forward, the tops of the shoulder blades will tend to come forward a little bit. All right, one more time. And then this time, as you bring the arms down, take hold behind the back of your right thigh. You just start by hugging your right thigh in towards your chest. And then extend your right leg toward the ceiling, so you're lengthening your right knee, and bend your knee. We'll do this a couple of times. If your knee doesn't straighten all the way, that's fine. You don't need to force it. Just kind of going to the point where it feels like you can elongate easily and comfortably. All right, and then the next time you extend through the leg, try to flex the foot. Push up through the heel. Take a few breaths here. You might feel a little stretch in your calf muscle. We'll need that as well for downward facing dog. So I'm just preparing the legs here. All right, and then hug your knee in towards your chest. Lower your foot down. Let's do the same thing with the left leg. So start by hugging the left knee in. Extend your knee. Again, it doesn't matter if it straightens all the way. You're just kind of finding out how easily your knee can lengthen, and when you get to the point where it won't lengthen any more easily, that's far enough. And then we'll try flexing through the left foot, just to the point where you feel a little stretch through the calf muscles, back of the ankle. Take a couple of breaths there. All right, good. Let's bring both legs up in the air, and then we'll extend up through the right leg, actually bend the right knee a little bit. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the ball of your, let me say that again, take your right big toe and your second toe and wrap them around your left Achilles tendon. And then see if you can push upward a little bit with the right foot just to help to lengthen the left leg and to lengthen a little bit more through the back of the ankle. All right, and then you can now take hold of the back of the left thigh with the left big toe and second toe, hook over the right Achilles tendon. So if your Achilles tendon were like the strap of a flip-flop, that's basically what you're doing. So you're kind of spreading the big toe and second toe of your left foot away from each other. And then use your left foot to push your right heel up toward the ceiling. Again, just to the point where you feel a little stretch through the calf. And if the knee doesn't straighten all the way, it doesn't matter, right? The idea is we're just pressing the heel up to lengthen a little bit through the calf. All right, good. And let's bring both feet down to the ground. And then from there, we're going to come over onto all fours. So coming over onto your hands and your knees, you might find that you need a little bit of extra cushioning underneath your knees. I'm going to use my blanket for that. You may or may not need it, but it's good to have the blanket close by if you do need it. All right. So coming onto all fours with your wrists underneath your shoulders and your knees underneath your hips. And then remember that movement of spreading your shoulder blades apart that you did when you were sitting on, when you were lying on your back. Let's do the same thing here in this position. So you kind of spread the shoulder blades apart to push the hands down into the floor. And now let the shoulder blades come toward each other. Your chest will sink towards the floor. And you'll create kind of a little valley between the shoulder blades. And we'll go back and forth between these movements. Doing this a couple of times. It's the same movement you were doing lying down on your back, but now you're doing it kind of flip 90 degrees to gravity. So now rather than your hands moving, it's your rib cage that's moving. Try to keep your spine relatively stable, so you're not arching and rounding the spine, or minimizing that anyway, but just feeling that movement of the shoulder blades on the back. Good. Okay. And then find a place where you feel like you're kind of somewhere in between those two extremes. And then just press firmly down through your fingerprints into the floor. So when we're putting weight on the hands, there's often a tendency to kind of collapse down into the wrists. We don't want to do that. We want to try to spread the weight through the hands. So you're pressing the fingerprints firmly down into the ground. And see if you can create a little feeling of a lift from underneath your wrists up into your shoulders. Just take a couple more breaths here. And then we'll just put a little bit more weight in the hands by extending the right leg back behind you with the right toes tucked under. And then you're just going to rock yourself a little bit forward and backward with the toes of the right foot. So the heel will move back, the heel will move forward. As you move back, there's a stretch through the back of the ankle. And as you move forward, you might notice that there's a little stretch through the wrist. So make sure you're not going so far that you feel like it's too much of a stretch. Continue to press down with the fingerprints. Use that action of spreading the shoulder blades to help you to root firmly into the ground. And then lower the right knee down. Let's do the same thing with the left leg. So extend the left leg back behind you. And a few times you rock yourself a little bit forward and a little bit backward. And continue to really try to press very actively through the hands so that you're not collapsing into your wrists. All right, lower your left knee down. And then from here, we're going to come down and have a seat. So coming into just however you want to sit, a comfortable cross-legged seat, or you could sit on your shins if that's a little bit more comfortable for you. All right, and then let's just pause for a moment. And I just want to talk a little bit about putting weight in the hands. You know, I think that many of us, most of us learn how to crawl as babies, but generally speaking, as adults, we don't do much of that. So many people maybe, kind of come to yoga practice without really having put weight on the hands, perhaps in many, many years. So if you feel like it's hard for your wrists to be able to handle supporting the weight, then that's natural, right? Because you probably, if you haven't really done a lot of yoga practice, you haven't done a lot of these poses, you probably have not been putting much weight on your hands for a long time. So one of the keys to being able to really be able to press, to minimize the stress on the wrists, is to be able to spread the weight across your hands so that you're not sinking into your wrist, but you're really distributing the weight through the hands. So let's see if we can feel this. If you bring the hands together into prayer, feel how the fingerprints match up. Try to match them up as best you can. And then try to actively press the fingerprints together into each other. Your thumbs are oriented a little different than the other fingers, so it won't be quite so much the fingerprints, but you can press the thumbs together too. So try to press the fingerprints into each other. And of course, you've got one hand that's stronger than the other, so try not to let your stronger hand overpower the other. Try to match the pressure. So you begin to feel the muscles here in the front of your forearm that are helping you to press the fingers into each other. And if you continue with that and you press even a little more, you'll actually feel that'll push the wrists away from each other. If you reduce the pressure into the fingers, the wrists can come back together. Right? So you can feel the more you press the fingerprints into each other, the less you're sinking into the wrists. All right. And now, see if you can flip your hand so you're looking down towards your wrist, and see if you can notice that there's a little gap between the base of your thumb and the base of your little finger. You might even notice a little hole in there, a little space. Kind of look down into that space. Okay. And then see if you could feel that there's also a little space between your palms. Right? So if your hands were a pita bread, that's where you'd put the falafel. Right? So we can press the hands together. We can press the fingerprints together. We can even press the knuckles at the bases of the fingers together. But we can still leave a little bit of space between the palms. And we can leave a little bit of space here in this gap between the base of the thumb and the base of the little finger. So just feel that. All right. And then we'll let that go. And we're going to come back onto all fours. So coming back onto all fours, walk your hands a little bit out in front of you and point your toes and start to drop your hips back towards your heels so that you're moving into child's pose. You only go as far as feels comfortable. So if you feel like, you can't get your hips all the way down to your heels, that's fine. It's not necessary. And then press into your fingerprints so much that you feel that your wrists lift up away from the floor. So you're kind of making like little pyramids with your hands. Press really actively down through the fingers and see if you could feel that this creates a little bit of a lift up along the undersides of your arm, all the way into your shoulder sockets, right? And you can feel that the armpits actually lift a little bit away from the floor as well. All right. And then as much as you can, try to allow the spine of the upper back to drop down. All right. And then we'll lower the wrists down, but try to keep that same sensation of the fingerprints pressing into the floor. And then see if you can still feel you've got a little space underneath the center of each palm, that gap between the base of the thumb and the base of the little finger is still there, and that you could even imagine you're kind of lifting from that gap up along your arms, like you're kind of drawing on long gloves that kind of come all the way up above your elbows. So using this press of the fingerprints into the floor to kind of lift up into the shoulders. All right, and then we'll come forward again. all fours. Can you continue to press the fingerprints into the floor to lift, create that just a slight sense of a gap underneath the palms of the hands as you press the fingers down. And then spread the shoulder blades. Let the shoulder blades come toward each other, that same action we were doing before. Feeling how as you spread the shoulder blades, that helps you to root the hands deeply into the ground. It actually helps you to push through the hands. All right, and then we'll find a place where it feels like you're not rounding your back, but you're spreading your shoulder blades enough. They're widening apart from the spine enough that you can really actively press through your fingers. And then from there, we'll extend the right leg back. And now we're going to extend the left leg back in plank position. Continue to press very, very actively down through the hands. Continue to spread the shoulder blades, to press the earth away with the hands. You're looking to create one straight line from your ankles, through your knees, through your hips, through your shoulders, through your ears. All right, lower your knees down. And now with your toes tucked under, start to move back towards child's pose. Again, continue to press into the fingers so you find that lift from underneath the wrists. And then we'll move forward again and move back towards child's pose. And you can feel that as you come forward, there's a little more weight in the wrists, a little more pressure in the wrists. As you come back, of course, you take some of that weight off. Good. All right. And one more time, we'll drop back towards the heels. And then we'll point the toes. Let's come up to sit again. If you're comfortable sitting on your shins, you could do that, or you could sit cross-legged, whatever is a comfortable way for you to sit. Let's just do just a little bit of movement for the wrists. If you did the wrist warm-up class in this series, you've already done this, but we'll repeat it. So starting with the hands in prayer, we'll spin the fingers forward and then point the fingers down and then just continue making some circles. And if this feels like it creates any kind of irritation for your wrists, please don't do it. All right, I mean, that really goes for kind of everything we're doing in this class. Okay, let's go the other way. You can let your elbows move, let your shoulders move. All right, good. Okay, so now we're going to start to move towards downward facing dog. We'll come back up onto all fours. By the way, as I mentioned before, many of us don't, tend to put a lot of weight in our hands normally in our everyday lives. And it does take some time to be able to strengthen the wrist to be able to do that. So one way that you can strengthen your wrists is by actually putting weight in your hands. But the thing is, you want to make sure that you're not doing too much too fast. So if you feel like, as we're doing some of these exercises, it's starting to overload your wrists, you need to give them a break, sit back, take a break, do a few little wrist circles or whatever it is that will help you to relieve your wrists, come back into it. The idea is we're progressively strengthening the wrists in a way that will eventually allow them to be strong enough to bear weight for longer periods of time. But we don't want to do too much too fast. Okay, so let's come on to all fours then. And then let's go back to this little bit of movement of the pelvis that we were doing lying down in the back. So you can tilt the pelvis backward. That'll pull the pubic bone up towards your belly button and towards your chest. And then tilt the pelvis forward so that the pubic bone moves down away from the chest. Do this a couple of times. And then see if you can find this action of the pubic bone moving back. And then let the pubic bone pull you back towards child's pose with the toes tucked under on the floor. At a certain point, right, the pubic bone will probably not be able to continue to go farther back, and you might feel your lower back rounds a little bit. But we're initiating that movement back by moving the pubic bone back between the thighs. Let's come forward again to all fours. Same thing, we move the pubic bone down, so a little bit of an arch in the back, Lead with the pubic bone as you move backward. And at some point you'll lose it. You'll feel your back will start to round. That's fine. Let's do that one more time. So coming forward. Again, leading with the pubic bone. All right, and then come forward again, and now we're going to move into downward facing dog. So we'll lead with the pubic bone. As we start to move the hips back, go ahead and lift the knees up off the floor. You can start with the knees a little bit bent. Continue to try to draw the pubic bone up and back. Press your fingerprints actively into the floor. So don't fall into the hands, but press the ground away. See if you can spread the shoulder blades so that you're feeling that the shoulder blades can actually a little bit wrap around the sides of the rib cage. Draw the pelvis up and back. So the spine is long. We're trying to kind of minimize the rounding in the spine. And then just start to press your right heel toward the floor. Maybe you lengthen the right knee, maybe not. And then bend the right knee, press the left heel. Back and forth a few times. Pedaling the feet out. And if you find that as you lengthen your legs, your back starts to round and it tilts all your weight forward into your hands, just keep your knees bent. You don't have to fully straighten your knee. The idea is you want to continue to try to pull the hips back so that your legs are doing more of the work of supporting you, and those poor arms don't have to do quite so much. All right, let's lower the knees down, drop the hips back toward the heels, pause for a few moments, and you can do any little things with your hands you'd like to give the wrists a little break if they need it. All right, good. So that's downward facing dog. Let's give it one more try. But what I would say is if you feel like you're really struggling to support your weight in your arms, one thing you can do to make this pose a little bit more accessible and to have less weight in your arms is you can use your blocks. So if you place the blocks on the floor about shoulder width apart and bring your hands onto the blocks, you need to have relatively firm blocks for this. You don't want soft blocks because then your wrists will sink in. Again, coming onto all fours, you'll shift your hips back toward your heels. So that, and then you want the hands far enough forward that they feel like that you can really fully lengthen the arms. And then from there, again, you can push back into downward facing dog. So you might find with this version that there's less weight in your hands. You can try coming forward to plank. By the way, this is also a way of reducing the weight in your hands in plank. And then leading with the pubic bone back to down dog. Keep the knees as bent as they need to be to really be able to find the full length in your spine. One more time, we'll come forward. Spread the shoulder blades, press the fingers into the floor, very, very active arms. Leading with the pubic bone, bend the knees, lift the hips back to downward facing dog. And only if you're able to keep that sensation of length through your spine do you need to lengthen the knees. Otherwise, you keep them bent. All right, let's lower the knees down, sit back, give yourself a break. All right, so that's downward facing dog. I hope that that was helpful for you and that it helped you to understand this pose a little bit more and gave you some tools for kind of how to prepare for it, how to work up to it, and how to make it a little bit more comfortable. Downward facing dog is a pose we do a lot of in many styles of yoga, so we often spend a lot of time in it. It's worth really learning how to figure out how to make yourself comfortable, right? Kind of find out how you can be comfortable, how your body can inhabit that pose with some degree of ease. So I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, thanks for watching.